And there it is on the satellite view tonight of the East Coast, Hurricane Florence. Good evening, everybody. A very impressive here on the satellite loop of the GO 16. Really shows the storm up quite well. And we've seen a few things happen today with regards to the hurricane. And the first thing is that we are seeing it getting better organized. The core of the storm is very impressive. There has been the eye, which this morning looked kind of ragged as it went through this eye wall replacement cycle. Well, that has played itself through, and now the eye getting better defined. I think this is the shot where we're going to see this run up to its peak intensity, and it has a chance to get to a Category 5 status briefly, I think, before it starts to get into a little bit of wind shear. There's not a whole lot of shear going on with this when it gets closer to the coast. That'll probably take it off its top intensity for sure, but it's still going to be every bit of a Category 4 hurricane, or at least a strong Category 3. And yes, the eye is giant, Magnus. One of the things that's happening now is that as it moves northward, it is growing in size. When hurricanes gain latitude, they like to grow in size, and that's what this is doing. So we're seeing an expansion of the cloud cover. The core is getting bigger. The extent of the gales getting larger, and this will probably continue as it heads toward the North Carolina coast. And by the way, when you look along the East Coast, you could see these bright white clouds. These are downpours and even some thunderstorms that develop late this afternoon and evening up and down the coast. There's an old cold front that's moving through that's dying out. And this is all part of the process. We are seeing this big upper high building into the eastern part of the United States. And we had a warm front with the low and the remnants of Gordon. But now that this ridge is building, we're seeing that front fall apart, and it's going to be gone, and what's going to be left is a very warm, humid, tropical air mass covering the eastern part of the United States. So basically, the atmosphere is being prepped up to expect and accept Hurricane Florence as it moves toward the eastern seaboard. So we'll come back to this a bit later on. There are a few things that I want to go over with you tonight. First of all, good evening to everybody. I hope you had a good day. We're going to update you on everything that's happened so far, and I'm going to also show you a few things that might be useful for those of you that are watching from the Carolinas. We also, remember yesterday I said there might still be a few surprises on the models, and well, we'll come to that in just a little bit. Right now, we've got the Hurricane Center's forecast with the warnings, and we have hurricane warnings and storm surge warnings from Edisto Beach, which is east of Charleston. So the Hurricane Center has put the eastern South Carolina coast, so I guess that's the northeast there, under a hurricane warning. That includes Myrtle Beach. You can see it here. I got a little bit tighter. You see where Long Bay is, but Mount Pleasant, Charleston, North Charleston, all not in the hurricane warning, at least not yet, but a hurricane watch remains in effect there, and that continues down a bit further south and west, but not quite to the Georgia border. We've got warnings up and down to the North Carolina coast. Wilmington, on the Hurricane Center's forecast, is on the south side of the track. Jacksonville, North Carolina, on the north side of the track. So right now the Hurricane Center has their forecast pretty much in between those 2 points. Those warnings continue out to Cape Hatteras, including the coastal waters, Albemarle and Pamlico Sound, and they extend north up the Outer Banks to about Duck, North Carolina, with a hurricane watch up from there to the Virginia, North Carolina border. We don't have anything in Virginia itself, so this does not include Virginia Beach, nor does it include any of the cities in southeastern Virginia like Hampton, Norfolk. They're not in any kind of a watch. So we see where the warning is, and one of the tools that the Hurricane Center has is the storm surge tool, and where did I put it? Tell me, there it is. Okay, so this is on, if you go to nhc.noaa.gov, and this is one of the reasons why you need to mark that website down. Any of these maps are National Weather Service maps, and it's perfectly reasonable to use these as far as trying to gather information. When I show you weather models and all the rest of it, and those type of maps, those are not to be used for making any kind of decision. So you want to consult your local National Weather Service office at weather.gov, or you go to the Hurricane Center for more official information at nhc.noaa.gov, and of course, listen to your officials. And now on the storm surge tool, which I can move around, this is actually from 5 p.m. Tuesday to 11 p.m. Friday for storm surge. The yellow area here, blue is 1 foot above ground, and the yellow is 3 feet above ground. This is for the North Carolina coast. Here's Atlantic Beach and Morehead City. So this is really the northern part of the Outer Banks that you're seeing here and you can see the storm surge. In the darker brown, that is, I believe, let me just look at the scale. The darker brown is 6 feet, and anything you see in red is 9 feet of potential storm surge. And in and around New Bern, for example, in these inland waterways, you've got 9 feet of storm surge. That water's got no place to go. It just basically piles in, and you can zoom in. It's very close. If you live in any of these areas, you can see the storm surge being forecast of over 9 feet above ground in a lot of areas. And we'll move up even further. You can find this tool. It's called the Potential Storm Surge Flooding Map. It's an inundation tool. As we go further north along the North Carolina coast, I'll widen it to get a little better perspective. So now we're moving up. Here's Pamlico Sound, and you can see the areas in the back bays where some places are getting 9 feet or more. And I would check this because on a regular basis, because what will happen is as each new advisory comes out and as each new forecast comes out, you're going to wind up seeing this change. The surge areas might change if the track changes, for example, or if the storm's strength changes. So you want to make sure you got the latest information. So don't just check it now, and then don't check it again, because if the track changes, all of that is going to change. Meantime, just to give you an early view here from WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, with respect to rainfall, and you can see the purple area here being indicated over coastal North Carolina of 20 inches plus, and the purple is 15 to 20, and an extensive area of 10-inch rains for all of eastern North Carolina and back into western Virginia. And this covers the forecast period from this evening right through next Tuesday. So this is going to include whatever remnant storm once it goes inland and then gets drawn northward, because eventually that, I think, is going to happen early next week. So this is cumulative for the next 7 days. And this is also going to change as the track changes. So remember to check this as well. And of course, you're going to have extensive to record flooding in some places if this winds up verifying. I want to go to the wide satellite loop at the moment, and you can see how all the tropics are turning. And in fact, notice you can see where Florence is. Isaac is to the east of the Leeward Islands, and warnings are probably going to go up for the Leeward Islands sometime tonight. Helene is the furthest east, and that's moving northward, so we really don't care about that. That's just basically going to stay out to sea. But we do have this disturbed weather in the Northwest Caribbean that's now moving into the Gulf of Mexico, and if you look at it, it's got that arc shape now. You're getting some cirrus outflow going on, and this system has become a little better organized. So I would not be shocked if once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, where conditions are a bit more favorable for development, that you could wind up seeing this develop into a tropical depression or a tropical storm and head toward the northwest, toward perhaps the Texas Gulf Coast. So we're going to want to watch this to see if it develops. The European does form something. It does form a closed circulation. It doesn't do very much with it. But given the fact that the tropics right now are kind of spinning out of control, I want to be a bit cautious. And we also have, the Hurricane Center mentions disturbed weather in the North Atlantic. There's going to be some kind of low that's going to form out here in the North Central Atlantic that's going to drop southwestward. And some of the models are actually keying on that to move westward early next week. All of this while Florence at this point is inland. So you understand where we are here with this. With the conditions obviously so very favorable across the tropics right now, where you're getting storms just about everywhere. It wouldn't be a shock if one or two more pop up in this explosive stretch that we've been in. The good news is that perhaps once these storms play themselves out, we'll probably see a bit of a break period as we move into the latter part of September. No guarantees, just it would be a logical thing after having all this energy spent that the atmosphere has to kind of take a step back and recharge, and maybe there'll be another burst come very late in the month or early October. But no matter, we've got a lot of things to deal with the front and center at the moment. All right, so I have two loops up here, so I don't need to have both of them up, so I can get rid of one. And here's a tight view of an enhanced view from late this afternoon. Let me just refresh this. And I'm not sure if that time is correct. This might be left from last night. I'm looking at the time and the date here, and it doesn't make any sense to me. Let me switch to another map. Because it's only 23Z, and it's saying it's already from 2Z. So, you know what? Let's just forget about this one and move on. I want to check. There's an Air Force reconnaissance aircraft on the way there. And we're going to take a look to see on tropicaltidbits.com to take a look and see what's going on. By the way, Levi Cowan, after you're done with me, go to his YouTube channel and check out his new video on what he thinks is going to happen with all of this. The latest recon mission is, just checking. Okay, it looks like they're not quite there yet. They're flying out off the North Carolina coast, so they got a ways to go before. That's mission 9, which is on their way there now. I'm trying to go back to mission 8. I don't know, for some reason I don't have everything. All the data here not all the data seems to be in, but the Hurricane Center did bring the winds up to 140 miles an hour and took the pressure down in their latest advisory to, I believe it was 935 millibars. I just want to double check to make sure. And I'm at nhc.noaa.gov right now. You can see the website here, front and center. And if you scroll down, for those of you who don't know, you can get all your advisories here. So you can pull up the public advisory, for example. So 945 millibars. I misspoke. It was off by 10. It'll probably be 935 at some point during the night, I'm guessing. So it's at 27.5. This is as of the 5 o'clock advisory. 67.1, 360 miles south-southwest of Bermuda, or 785 miles east-southeast of Cape Fear, North Carolina. Top winds 140, moving at 300 degrees or west-northwest or almost northwest at 17 miles an hour. So it's moving at a pretty good clip here. And the lowest pressure, as we said, 945 millibars. So just to review with respect to the warnings, we have hurricane warnings out from the South Santee River in South Carolina, which is east of Charleston, to Duck, North Carolina. That includes Pamlico and Albemarle Sounds. A tropical storm watch from north of the North Carolina-Virginia border to Cape Charles Light in Virginia, and for Chesapeake Bay south of New Point Comfort. We also have storm surge watches and warnings. You can check all of these out by just pulling up the advisory. So I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to bring up, we're going to go to the GFS model from late this afternoon. And actually, even before that, let's go to the European model, because it was very interesting today what's happening. And I'm going to bring up the upper air. Okay, so for those of you who doubted that this upper high was going to build, you were wrong. Okay, obviously this upper high is not only building, but it's really going to be very strong and dictating everything here going forward as far as Florence is concerned. Just want to make sure everybody's with me. You guys can hear me okay, and that's a good thing. All right. Now watch that upper high builds northwestward as Florence also moves northwestward, and the ridge is really driving it to the coast. And the fact that it's moving up now at 17 miles an hour is an indication of the strength of this ridge. It's not just some weak upper high. There's a strong enough steering current from the southeast to move it along. Now what happens is, after we get to, this is Thursday morning. At this point, the storm is roughly at about 33 and about 75 and a half, 75 and 3/4. The European brings it in, looks like close to, or actually brings it just to about Wilmington. But at this point, what happens is the high splits. You've got the ridge off in the Atlantic. You've got an upper high that is sitting in the middle Mississippi Valley here. You could probably put an H somewhere in southern Illinois or southeast Missouri. And by the way, if you look in the northwest Gulf of Mexico, that little closed circle there, that might be a tropical depression or a tropical storm going toward the Texas coast. But now, back to Florence, it gets almost to the coast, but the European kind of stops it from going inland. And that's because what starts to happen is the upper high begins to build and build furiously across the Great Lakes and up across upstate New York, Pennsylvania, and into New England, and gradually builds over the top and cradles it. So what happens to Florence? It comes to the coast of North Carolina near Wilmington, but just barely maybe touches land, and then it moves southwestward, and then the European brings it in actually as a hurricane southwest of Charleston along the coast. So if you use the European literally, you would expect that we would see, may see, if this verifies, we may have to see hurricane warnings extended further south. I think that's why the Hurricane Center's got to watch where they have it. I understand what they're doing with respect to their forecast, because as good as the European is, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. And this could have serious implications because of the fact that the hurricane itself, the center stays over water and basically rakes the entire coastline from coastal North Carolina down into all of coastal South Carolina. So this has serious implications if this winds up being correct. I'll show you the surface here, and you can follow the lows. Unfortunately, again, when it comes to the European model, we only have it in 24-hour increments, but just backing it up. So here it comes, approaches the coast. There it is. It's just barely offshore, and at this point, it moves. It starts to move. Now, this is 24-hour movement here. This is Friday morning. This is Saturday morning. This is Sunday morning. This entire area for 48 hours, probably from North Carolina or even southern Virginia southward into South Carolina, getting pounded with heavy rains. This is going to be a serious rainmaker to, basically moving this storm and only very, very slowly weakening it over a 48-hour period like this. This is not good, both from the standpoint of its impact to the coast and its impact when it comes to rain. Now from here, the surface low starts to move northwest because the upper high is going to break down. We can go back to the upper air, and you can see the upper high starts to break down. So here it is at its strongest point, which is on Sunday, where you've got this east-west high from the Great Lakes right into New England. And by the way, for those of you watching in my area, New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, southeastern New York, southern New England, Long Island, there are going to be no impacts at all from the landfall of Florence. None. Anything that we're seeing weather-wise, we would have seen anyway, regardless of whether there was a hurricane coming into the southeast coast or not. All right, we have a new moon, so tides have been running higher. They may run higher all week because of the fact that we do have this hurricane, but the hurricane is coming in, tucked in that part of the southeast coast, so that lessens the impact here from the standpoint of tides, and there probably will be some wave action in short order. But as far as impacts are concerned, I mean, I know politicians have a difficult time saying things the right way. Some of the things that I've heard for my area and for New Jersey, the phrasing that was used: collateral damage, severe winds, heavy rains, high tides. None of that is going to happen. And in fact, I will tell you that if this verifies like this, Saturday and Sunday may actually turn out to be a weekend with no worse than a mix of sun and clouds and temperatures into the 80s and warm and humid conditions. And that's it. So just bear that in mind. Very important. A lot of the stuff that you hear, and I work in media, so I get this. And this is a problem that I've been fighting for 40 years, where I go in and I correct scripts because non-weather people are writing them. And they're almost always writing some of this stuff on old information. And I try to get ahead of the curve. I'm not always successful in making sure that they're not saying, these sort of canned cliche things. You expect the worst and hope for the best. I understand that you should certainly use that as a way of taking an action, but there are areas that this is not, action is not required. Might be a good time to make sure you got all your stuff anyway for when the time comes. But again, if you're up from, say, the Delmarva Peninsula, from Delaware on up north of there, northern Virginia through southern New England and in through New England, this is not an issue with respect to landfall. We may have issues with the remnant low. So here's the upper high. It breaks down. The remnant low now starts to lift northward, and if you look up into the northern plains, you're starting to see the jet stream from Canada finally coming down, and it basically picks that up and kicks it out to the northeast. So we will probably see the remnant rains eventually moving up the east coast, but that may not come until later Monday or Tuesday up into the northern mid-Atlantic and the northeast. It's going to come sooner, though, for areas in West Virginia, North Carolina. Here's the GFS. I'm not going to go through the upper air on the GFS because it was pretty much the same, but the surface on the GFS with the European, it's the same idea, and in fact, the late afternoon run of the GFS is almost identical to what the European did today. And even the 12Z, it just did the same thing the European did, except it did it a little bit further to the north. But here's Florence on the GFS. This is Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, so 8 p.m. Thursday evening. Then it slows down to an absolute crawl, gets to just about the coast near Wilmington, then it comes back out, drops southwestward, and then southwestward, coming inland near Charleston. It's very close to what the European has. And then from here, this is where, if you look at what's going on, by the way, from the standpoint of the hurricane on the northern fringe of it, there's very little going on in terms of precip. It's really not until you get to Monday that you start to get the rains start to go up into the mountains, into West Virginia and Western Virginia. I know Johnny Quest is probably on tonight, and he's watching this glued because he's got the big rain problem in Western Virginia and in eastern West Virginia. Well, the remnant low comes right up the Appalachians, which is not going to be good for you if that happens. Either you want it to go either west of the Appalachians and weaken to as much as it can. The GFS seems to be holding on to a stronger identity with this, and then it hooks up with that cold front and it moves away to the northeast. And then we got this nice big high Now, I don't know what this is. The European was hinting at this also, something with at the bottom of this front that separates and forms into some kind of tropical system. I have no idea if that's correct. That seems to be, that seems to be a bit of model noise going on. So I'm not even going to worry about that at this point. We got so much front and center going on. Rainfall on the model. We'll bring up the rainfall map and show total accumulated precip. Now, it's been my experience that when you when you look at this when it comes to tropical storms, you might want to add at least 50% to these amounts, or in some areas you may want to double them. So it's clear that you've got 16, 20-inch amounts being indicated for southeastern South Carolina, for the eastern part of South Carolina and coastal North Carolina. So that could easily be 30 inches of rain. If it's moving that slow, why not? And when you go further north, we're seeing up into Virginia, we're seeing basically 2 to 5 inches. So that could certainly be 4 to maybe 9 or 10 inches. Bear in mind, if the tracks keep adjusting, these areas are going to adjust. So we are going to have to kind of ride with this over the next few days and just watch what happens. Very, very interesting situation developing. I'm going to come back to the board with you guys because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So let me bring this down and bring me up. Come on, Joe. There we go. So I'm up full screen now. So I'm going to come to the chat board. Let me just say thank you to Jennifer DeBorrow, Lou Garu, Nick Cortese, Christine Ledeen, PRJ Grudge, and Nick Cortese again for hitting Super Chat tonight. Thank you very much. We got a really nice crowd here on YouTube. So as you already saw, Evan Deese, I already asked the question about inland South Carolina. That's a big where in South Carolina. Are you on the coast or are you close to the North Carolina border? I certainly think that if you're in South Carolina right now, you have to have your guard. You have to certainly have your antenna up with what's going on. Daniel D, the chance of this turning into a Cat 5 before landfall. I think it will briefly. It could briefly hit Cat 5 while it's out there offshore. I don't think it's going to stay a Cat 5 when it approaches the coast. If this were moving if it were to keep moving at 17, 18 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, heading for the coastline, then it would have a good chance of holding on to a lot of its intensity. But because it's going to slow down, the circulation is going to move partially overland, and that is going to cause some weakening. And then as we get closer to the land and we get outside the Gulf Stream, there's a pocket of cooler water. The shelf water in the Carolinas it's warm, but it's a little cooler than the Gulf Stream. So the slow movement is going to help to take it off its peak intensity, but it could still wind up coming in as a Category 4. And the last time that happened in North Carolina was Hurricane Hazel in 1954 for a Category 4, and the last major was in 1994 with Fran. PRJ Grudge, again, thank you for the Super Chat hit. Really appreciate it. Would that second system that goes, Ben McInnes, would the second system that goes back into the Carolinas be the low that's currently forming in the North Atlantic? No. Actually, on the European, it showed a low coming southwestward that gets to about 35 degrees north and 70 degrees west, and then lifts up northeast as the weather front comes through and takes Florence out of the way. So that is something that's separate. After the front goes by on the southern end, some kind of low spins off. The European did it and the GFS did it, but I'm just wondering whether there's some model noise going on with respect to that. It looked kind of weird to me. I'm not saying it's not impossible. I've seen enough weird things happen in my career weather-wise. So let me come down here. I'm going to try and scroll up. I know you guys have questions up further that put them up earlier. Charlotte, North Carolina, a lot of wind, and European model is 10 times better. Well, certainly the European seems to be leading the way here with all of this. But you're inland. I mean, I would think the bigger issue for you is going to be rain more than wind. Uh, you're well inland, and by the time, I mean, could you get some gusty winds in some squalls? Absolutely. But in terms of the fierce winds that they're going to see on the coast, you're never going to see that there. You're never going to see anything like that in Charlotte. Let's see. The Gene Paranormal Florida. 4 days models going over all over the place, doing looping. 2 more days. Well, I got to tell you, I wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me to see a little bit more of a south and west adjustment. There's certainly time for that. I think the adjustments from here should get smaller and smaller. Jennifer DeBarro, do you think we'll have any effects in South Central PA? Still experiencing flooding due to record rain. I don't think you're going to see anything through Sunday. You are going to see some rains from the remnant low coming up Monday into early Tuesday, and that might be a couple of inch rain producer. But I really don't want to venture a guess at this point because I want to see what's left of Florence after it moves inland. Are we going to have some kind? Sometimes with these systems, you get these sort of where the signature on the radar, the core circulation stays alive even though it's been well inland. We've seen that numerous times, and if you remember back at the beginning of the season, the first storm Alberto, the core circulation stayed intact all the way up into the Great Lakes, and if those that got under it got into some rather heavy rainfall. So the same thing could happen this time around. But I don't want to. I don't want to say too much ahead of time because that part of the forecast I think has to evolve yet, and it's going to depend on the track of Florence and where it goes inland. Andrew Crabtree. You're talking to David R. What's the wind speed going to be in Myrtle Beach? So asked Nick Ortiz. Look, if these models are correct, you're going to see hurricane force winds there, and I think anybody that's in the warning area right now, you really need to pay attention to what your local officials are saying with regards to what you need to do. I certainly can't give you advice on what you should do. But you should be listening to local officials. Look, if there's doubt in your mind, you can always fix what breaks. It's very hard to fix a human being if something should happen, God forbid. So your geography better than I. There's hurricane warnings up there for Myrtle Beach. I think people who live in that area, I can't give you a specific answer as far as what kind of wind. You keep asking me that. I don't know. I can't give you an exact number. But if you're in a hurricane warning area, you can expect that there would be hurricane force winds and higher gusts above sustained hurricane force winds. You have this going toward Georgia and Atlanta further south, like I dreamed. This is Chad Crawford. It changed today. You showed this low tracking over directly into North Georgia. Well, I mean, in terms of the remnant rains and lows, the remnant low and the rains, not impossible that it does that. And it gets down to South Carolina and to southwestern South Carolina like the European, and then it jumps straight westward before it turns northward up the Appalachians. Not impossible because of that big upper high. That upper high is so strong. It's a very, very strong ridge to build across the Northeast back to the Great Lakes, and that really is doing all of this. There's no trough bringing this up the East Coast. It's bringing this in. It's all ridge. It's going to be the next shortwave trough coming in from Canada, the Northern Plains, that'll eventually lift up the remnant low. But that's again going into early next week. Okay, I'm just kind of running through here. I really am making an effort. I want to make sure I don't, I want to get everybody here. Iron Mind 10, I don't understand how a computer can forecast a loop-to-loop. Well, it's the physics in the atmosphere, and it's the math. And I have to tell you, over the last number of years, models have gotten a lot better. They're not perfect, but they have gotten a lot better with this sort of stuff. And when one of them when one of them shows it, you say, okay. When two of them shows it, you kind of, your eyebrows get raised. When you have multiple models showing the same thing, it's a pretty good bet that they're seeing something. What they're basically telling you is that the upper air steering is completely collapsing, and the storm is going to respond to even the slightest push, and more than likely that steering push is going to want to push it southwestward, and then eventually, as the ridge builds, it turns to the west. Lizzie Customs, thank you very much. You live in a floodplain in Bucks County, PA, and you trust me. Thank you so much. Dave Lizzie, thank you. I appreciate that. You've got no problems, Bucks County, PA, that whole area. You're going to have some downpours to deal with over the next couple of days, but they are not hurricane related. And with respect to the remnants coming up the coast, that's a problem for Monday into Tuesday of next week, and we'll deal with that after we get landfall. Because you look at the models, we're going to be sitting here Friday night still waiting for this thing to cross land, if that's correct. Thanks for the hard... Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I already got that. Summy Girl, rainfall in Virginia Beach amounts 6 to 10 inches. That's being forecast. Well, look, I don't know that you're going to get very much from the initial push. You're going to have to wait for all of this to come up. I would, please, one of the things, and I can't emphasize this enough, if there's ever a situation where meteorology is fluid, this is it. I've said this many times before, and I think this is worth repeating. You can look at meteorology and say that, well, it's not an exact science. Okay, that's not how I would look at it, and I've always kind of taken issue with that to some degree. Meteorology is a fluid science. It's a forecast of change, and it's a forecast of the change, and that ain't easy. All right, believe me, it ain't easy. So you're trying to anticipate the change of every molecule in the atmosphere over the entire world. It's a very, very daunting task, and without computers, the computer models that we have, you could never do it by hand. And the forecasts as a whole have greatly improved. And listen, look at what we've been seeing with Florence. I mean, if there was ever an instance where you are seeing a forecast that has worked out exceptionally well, this is it. I mean, the margin of error here has been very small in terms of the forecast positions. It's been absolutely perfect, the Hurricane Center has, with dealing with intensity, and that's the harder part usually. That's the part that they don't have a good handle on, and they'll tell you that. So, this is a good thing that we're seeing here. We're watching meteorology at play where everything is working, at least so far, and we are staying, if we're not, we're trying to stay ahead of the curve, and we may be in for a change, and we are ahead of the curve. And that's where you want to be, because that's when you can get the best information out there. And please, just when you listen to forecasts, listen carefully and listen to every word. Hopefully they're giving you, you've got a good forecaster that you can trust, that does well most of the time, that you can rely on. But please, it's very important you listen carefully because of how specific a forecast like this can be. I'm going to come back to your questions in just a second. I want to do one thing just really fast, and that is for those of you who are interested, there's my Patreon platform. I'll put the link up in the chat. This is basically, you've got all my website posts from meteorologistjoechaffee.com, videos that I have done a couple. When I have a little more time, I'm going to be doing more just for Patreon members. There's a couple of tiers of membership. It starts at $2 a month. You will get notified every time a post goes on, and when I'm going to be doing YouTube videos along with the ones I'm still going to be doing on the YouTube channel. That's not going to change, but it's a great way to support what I'm doing and to support this channel. And I appreciate those of you that have signed up very much. Thank you, and those of you who may consider it. So I just wanted to just bring that up, and I'll put the link up on the chat board in a second. Let me come back to the. I want to come back to a couple of other models that we could look at here, and we'll look at the HWRF. which is a model that doesn't get looked at, with all the models we have. But this just gives you a bit of a different perspective here, so I think it's probably worth looking at tonight to see what it's doing. And I'm just waiting for all the maps to load here, which they are doing at the moment. And here we go. Okay, so we'll start with the 3 hour. Now this map is a little different, so you might just kind of throw you off a little bit. The geography and the moves on the map, and the storm actually stays near the center of the picture. So here we are as we approach the North Carolina coast, and we'll see. I'm looking at this for the first time. So the HWRF actually does have a landfall, looks like just near or just south of Wilmington, and then it sort of drags it westward slowly along the North Carolina-South Carolina border into western Tennessee, and then on up into northern Kentucky. And at this point now, we are at Sunday afternoon, so we're starting to see that next trough swinging in out of the plain. So that's an interesting option. Again, do not use any of these maps specifically for any kind of decisions that you are making, because that's not a wise thing. You want to use the official forecast. But I'm just illustrating here with respect to what the models are doing. We'll bring up the hurricane tracking models for late this afternoon, and all of the tracking models have it going inland, south and west of Hatteras. So it looks like the furthest east of the models is just east of Jacksonville, North Carolina, and the furthest west looks like it's touching Charleston, but the vast cluster of them bringing it into southwestern North Carolina and then taking it northwestward. We have a few models doing some loops, but the hurricane track models seem to want to move it inland, even though it's going to be moving very, very slowly. These tracks, by the way, this would not be good for the rain areas for Virginia, especially for Western Virginia and West Virginia. This would be a big problem for rain. The heaviest rain will fall north and northeast of the storm track, as at least from what's being modeled. There's usually not a whole lot that goes on west and south of the storm track when it comes to rain. And where did I go? Here we go. Let's bring up the GFS, the ensembles, and here are the ensembles. You saw what the operational did. The ensembles now, look at all the members are all so tightly clustered into southwestern North Carolina and maybe the extreme corner of South Carolina east of Myrtle Beach. So somewhere in there, I'm really hoping that it doesn't do that whole looping thing. I really would like it to just kind of, if it's going to do it, both scenarios are not good. The looping issue, I think, is worse because that really just basically rakes a couple of 100 miles of shoreline, and I don't think that would be a good thing. Plus, it really prolongs everything, where we don't wind up seeing a landfall until sometime over the weekend, a final landfall until sometime over the weekend. And by the way, there's it's always possible that it could go inland near Wilmington or Jacksonville or somewhere in between and get just inland and then move southward and come back out. There may be some more weird things in play. So I'm going to come back to the board. I want to at least acknowledge Stephanie Sparks, Ellen Abraham, hi from Alaska. We haven't seen you in a while. Thank you very much for hitting Super Chat. Steve LaPointe, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight, very much. And also, I want to make sure I get to everybody's questions. So I'm just going to put that link up for Patreon. I just brought it up there. So for those of you, again, who are interested, it's a great way to support my channel for just a couple of bucks a month. And it goes a long way. I really appreciate that. I can get a couple of cigars, after a couple of months, anyhow. So I'm just reviewing back everybody's posts. I want to make sure I've got. I didn't miss any questions. Now, Robin Meade, it is back to a category, it's a category 4. It never dropped it got down to 130 miles an hour. It was still a 3. It's a category 4 hurricane with winds of 140 miles an hour. In fact, we're going to have the new 8 o'clock advisory up shortly, so we can take a look at what they say on that one. And okay, so let me come back to the bottom and I'll go backwards. You guys put up a lot of posts tonight. Roger Egadsworth in South Carolina, you started watching last year with Irma. Oh, appreciate it. Thank you for being back here. Not getting much from the recons yet, David Schwartz. I just checked a little while ago and there was still nothing new. I don't know if the website is slow to update or not. WPC rain total is low. No one takes the mountains into account. I would agree with that. I think, in fact, I can bring up, let me bring up WPC's map because I do have it here. There we go. And so there's the rainfall. Now, they added they must have they've added a 20-inch area on WPC's map. So I showed you the big version here earlier, okay? So this is their version. This is where the map. This is where they get it from. This is the map that they do every single day. And yeah, I would say this certainly has a chance where you could wind up seeing much higher amounts in the mountains. But all of that is going to hinge on track. By the way, the area that you see down in coastal Texas, that is in response to whatever is coming out of the Northwest Caribbean. And if that winds up developing into a tropical depression or possibly even a tropical storm, we've got some 5-6 inch rain amounts being indicated for the South Texas coast. So we're going to be, we're certainly going to keep our eyes on that in case something is to develop. So, I think this is probably a good point. I'm going to, let me put me over here. We'll put the hurricane up full screen on the satellite. I will refresh the satellite. And while this is up, what I will do is I'm going to check on the Hurricane Center to see if we have any new advisories yet. The 8 o'clock advisory is out from the Hurricane Center, 28.0 north, 67.9 west, still carrying a west-northwest movement at 17 miles an hour, 945 millibars, so the plane probably has not gotten there yet, and top winds 140. So no real change on this. Let me just really quickly point out there's an intermediate advisory that's also out for Isaac. The Hurricane Center noting that it's moving quickly westward, also at 17, and that it seems to be getting disorganized on the satellite. They're still carrying 70-mile-an-hour winds, but they did note that there was shear going on, and this system may wind up weakening. When they're as small as Isaac is, if you think back to Beryl, which was also an incredibly small system, some of the weather folk were teasing that it was basically a severe thunderstorm, and they gave it a name. But Beryl was able to intensify, and it just sort of was in its own little environment where it was surrounded by unfavorable conditions all around it. These small systems tend to react very quickly in one direction or another, so they wind up strengthening sometimes faster than you think, and then they wind up weakening rather quickly as well. You can see on their outlook, by the way, the area that we're talking about in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll put it up on the 5-day outlook. This is the area, and they have now raised the probability of development here to 70%. Area of disturbed weather in the extreme northwest Caribbean and southeast Gulf showing signs of organization. Upper level winds forecast to become more conducive for development, which I agree they will be. And a depression is likely to form by Thursday night while the disturbance moves across the western Gulf, and if necessary, an Air Force plane is going to be dispatched to investigate. Formation chance 50% in the next 48 hours and 70% over the next 5 days. So we might have something spin up here. And again, that may feed into the ridge that is driving Florence, so that could wind up being problematic. And also, by the way, this is the system in the central Atlantic where the Hurricane Center has actually raised that chance there too to 50% in the next 5 days. So they may be reacting to what they're seeing on some of the models. It was the European that took this and developed it. This is the upper trough, by the way, part of the upper trough that's taking Helene and moving it northwards. It's very interesting how you get all these things are sort of interacting with each other in one way or another. It's like those gears in the old Child's Play toy that I have alluded to many times, with the gears constantly changing in size and in shape, and just really gets the kids to sleep. But in weather, it keeps you guessing all the time. Michael Kufeld, John Curry, thank you for hitting Super Chat. Really appreciate it very much. And let's see. Eye wall replacement cycles causes fluctuations. David Schwartz is correct. We had the eye wall replacement cycle with this went on last night into this morning, which caused some weakening. And then once the cycle is done, the old eye collapses, as you say. Then the new eye wall forms and tightens up, and the winds go back up. That's exactly what happens in these eye wall replacement cycles. They're basically just kind of rejuvenating themselves. New old thunderstorms die, and then new ones form. Just running up north here, northeast North Carolina, Virginia Beach, looks like it's not going to be as bad anymore. Well, look, you're on the edge, and I would be cautious. You'll probably get some weather, but I don't think you're going to get the kind of weather that they're going to see down south of you and southwest of you down in that part of North Carolina when you go southwest of Hatteras. That's going to be problematic. But remember, the storms, the surge may be, there still may be surge issues in parts of eastern North Carolina. So you want to be careful about that. If surge is an issue, use the storm inundation tool on the National Hurricane Center's website at nhc.noaa.gov. I showed it early on near the beginning of the video, so if you want to check it on the replay, use the storm inundation tool that's very helpful because you can zoom in pretty close to wherever you live and see what kind of tidal flooding is being forecast. Is that some dry air coming in on the west side? You got to be careful on this loop because when they go to the infrared and it goes to darkness, you really can't see the detail. I mean, I'm not seeing that. I really don't see that much dry air. It looks like there might have been a little bit on the northern part of the storm there where the clouds look like they're cut off a little bit. But then as you go into the infrared, that sort of disappears. I'm not sure. I got to bounce this off. I got to bounce this off one of my friends, one of my weather friends who knows the satellite lights better. I can ask Bill Goodman about it. He's pretty good with this. Johnny Quest, what's happening in Hawaii? Tropical storm Olivia is weakening. I actually can bring up the satellite. I think the satellite that I have of the Pacific on this goes out that far. Let me double check, and I think it does. What I did notice with Tropical Storm Olivia is that the low-level circulation with Olivia has basically completely separated from the convection. And if you look on the visible here, you can actually see the low-level center has separated from the main convection. Top winds I believe they were carrying 65 miles an hour on it. It's moving southwestward, which is odd. This is actually coming in from the northeast. So they will have tropical storm conditions, but it's also going to weaken as it moves southwestward because there's all sorts of wind shear going on there that's ripping this apart. It's really amazing. We've seen it 3 times this year with Hawaii, with major hurricanes running around it, and they just seem to have this protective zone over them where there's this sort of semi-permanent upper air wind shear that just takes these systems apart. I don't pay too close attention to that part of the world very often, so it's all of this is a learning experience for me, but it's really interesting how Hawaii seems to be, it has somebody up there likes Hawaii, let's put it that way, and make sure they keep it as protected a paradise as it really is. If you haven't been there, it is just an absolutely beautiful place on this earth, and everybody should go at least once. Weather Enlo, I've already answered your question. I'm not answering it again. Let's see. Should I have Bertha Ethiopian? Okay. Berta, I'm sorry. Should I evacuate? I live in the Piedmont of North Carolina, and my teacher said we're going to be safe because we have the Outer Banks. Okay. I can't answer that question. You're not. Let me answer it this way. You're in the mountain areas. Okay. You're not going to get what they're going to get down on the coast. Okay. You are going to get rain. You're not going to get what they're going to experience down in coastal North Carolina. Those really strong winds are never going to make it that far north. Okay. So take a deep breath. You'll be fine. All right. And you can tell your teacher that you asked me about this, and you've been watching my weather channel on YouTube, okay? And I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Hope that helps. If you got another question, just throw it on the board. The Euro model's looking good. South Texas will either get Joyce or, well, let's not push the Cat 1 thing, Tornado 1994. You got to get it to develop first. How much time does it have, and how, conditions might be conducive for development, but that doesn't mean they're conducive for rapid strengthening. There's a huge difference, so you want to be careful there. Let's see. Piedmont isn't the mountains; it's roughly 3 hours from the coast. Okay, I'm sorry, Kevin. I'm not. See, this is why it's hard for me to, when you're asking me specifics about where you live, it's hard for me to answer because unless I've been there. I don't, I'm not familiar. This is why you go to your local National Weather Service. You go to your local officials when it comes to answering those kind of questions. But you're far enough inland, Berta, so the wind answer still remains the same. You've got no worries. And no, in Central Virginia, I doubt that there's going to be any kind of wind issue. Look, let's forget about the remnant low coming up for Monday for a moment, because we have no idea that what that's going to be like at this point until we see where landfall is and how the storm reacts to the ridge and the weakening ridge. Okay, but when it comes to the impacts, you're fine, as I said, when you go into Central Virginia. I've kind of lost my train of thought now, but again, just to go over with respect to impacts, if you're in northern and central Virginia with respect to rain and points north and east of there, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York City, Long Island, southern New England, southeastern New York, nothing's happening here from the landfall, okay? You've got nothing to worry about if you're in those areas. Tidal flooding, yes, but there's tidal flooding because of the new moon, and really not being impacted that much by the hurricane being out there. So just bear that in mind. The rain issue with regards to the remnants, we'll deal with that as we move over to the weekend. Okay? So I'm going to have to wrap it up at this point because I have to eat some dinner and then get ready for my night broadcast. But let me just tell you what's going on for tonight. First off, and I know a couple people have just thrown out a couple of questions. I'll come back. I'll address those before I say goodnight. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so for all of you latecomers, I'm just going to put the link to my Patreon page. So if you want more access to all my website posts and everything else, and by the way, there are no ads on them, and you can use the Patreon app to pull them up too. And it starts at $2 a month. So just laying it out there. Okay, so here's the schedule for tonight. The Joe Chaffee Show is going to be on Facebook at 9:15. So you can tune back in. If you haven't had enough now, you can get more weather at 9:15. We generally tend to focus more on eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, including New York City, Philadelphia, that general area. But we do have folks that are watching from other areas, and we certainly welcome you if you'd like to join us. And if you're not on Facebook, I usually upload the video to my YouTube library, but I won't be able to do that until probably around midnight tonight. So don't sit around and expect it to come after 10 o'clock. Sometimes I can do it that early. My first patron, that's Jill, if I remember correctly. Good to see you on board tonight. Hope all is well with you. Lori Lasser wanting me to get some rest. I'm going to try. Scott Reese, the winds everyone is afraid of, unless you're in North or South Carolina and on the coast, I would add to what you're saying. The rain is the bigger deal for everybody that's inland. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. What do you think the impact will be on Savannah if this thing moves down south after the landfall? Good question. If the center winds up staying north of you, I don't think the impact, you might get some wind and maybe you'll get some rain, but as long as the center stays north of you, and don't forget, if it winds up straddling the coastline all the way down like that, it's going to reach that area in South Carolina in a much weaker state than it is now. You're certainly not going to see it there as a Category 4 hurricane. If it does what I showed you earlier before from either the GFS or the European, it may just be down to a minimal hurricane at that point. And the rain is going to be the bigger deal. But if you're on the west side or the southwest side of it, there may not be very much. So just bear that in mind. Timothy, thanks for the kind words. Keeping my sanity through these high volume live streams. I have to tell you, when I first started doing them, it was new to me, so it took me a little while to get comfortable with them. Now I'm very comfortable with them, and I'm enjoying them. Some days I'm tired, and you can tell when I'm tired when I'm struggling to complete sentences. I'm doing an hour show here without a commercial break, and that's a tough thing to do. And none of this is scripted, by the way. I kind of go on the fly, and sometimes things pop into my head, and I think, oh, let me show this, or let me show that. You put up, you guys put up great questions, and I want to make sure I address everybody that's on this board. So, if I miss you, please, I apologize, but I will get you next time around. I promise you. So Southern Virginia, expect tornadoes. You know what? You're going to be on the northern edge of whatever precip that there is. At this point, I would say probably not. If there's going to be that kind of weather, is probably going to occur closer to where the center moves ashore, and not necessarily on the northern fringe. Thank you very much. AS gives me a big recommendation for my Patreon page. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I've grown the subscriber base there, which is terrific. I want to get more people on. By the way, you have the ability to message me at any time. So if you're a subscriber on the Patreon page and you message me, you got questions, something's going on, you need some help, I'll get back to you right away. If you message me on Facebook, sometimes I'll get to you and sometimes I don't. But I'm making sure that I pay attention to those of you who are on my Patreon page, and I will. You leave comments, I will respond back. I really make an effort to do that. But the problem is, we've got all these social media platforms and all these other things going on. It is very, very difficult. Okay, enough. Here we go. Here's the deal. Joe and Joe Weather Show. Tonight, 9:15 on Facebook, my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. I'll upload it to YouTube later on tonight when I get home. So if you miss it and you want to see it, you can watch it there. And it'll also be linked up in Patreon as well. Tomorrow, we'll do double live streams again, 9 a.m. roughly. We'll do a 9 a.m. live stream, and then we'll do another live stream tomorrow evening. I think 7 p.m. works better, because of the fact that at that time, I got the whole GFS run. We're not playing around waiting for it to come in. So if you are watching from coastal North and South Carolina, please pay attention to what your local officials are telling you about whether you need to evacuate or not. This is a Category 4 storm. I can't tell you what it's going to do when it approaches land. We can only go by what we're seeing here in the world of weather, which is always very fluid and very changing. But this certainly does have the potential to be destructive, and you want to take appropriate actions, and you want to do it with the correct official information. So it's your local officials, it's the National Hurricane Center, nhc.noaa.gov. Use the inundation tool, and in fact, I will put a link to it so everybody can have it. I'm going to put the link up right now. right here. So if those of you who are interested, take a look. It's interactive. You can move it around to your own general area to see what kind of storm surge you're going to have, and maybe that's the reason why you might have to make a decision as far as evacuation is concerned. Use it. It's there. And everyone, please stay safe, pay attention, keep abreast of the weather, and we will see you either later or tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening. Good night, everybody.